Our topic of discussion today is National Commission for Women. Introduction. Women constitute nearly half the humanity. Women in India, alongside with their male counterparts, have contributed in all walks of life. Their contribution in the armed forces, IT sector, politics, industry, and other significant areas, while balancing their role as a daughter, wife, and mother, are commendable. They have taken key roles at every crucial junctures of our society. In spite of equal rights guaranteed with men in the Constitution and other legal safeguards for women, they were discriminated and victimized at workplace, in the family, and society at large. Women encounter different forms of atrocities and violence such as rape, female infanticide, harassment at workplace, dowry deaths, domestic violence, etc. Illiteracy and ignorance about their rights were rampant among a majority of the women. It was in this background that the Committee on the Status of Women in India, set up by the Government of India in 1974, recommended the setting up of a National Commission for Women to fulfill the surveillance functions, to facilitate redressal of grievances, and to accelerate the socio-economic development of women. Again, the National Perspective Plan for Women's 1988 to 2000 also recommended the constitution of such an apex body for women. Accordingly, the first National Commission for Women was constituted on 31st January 1992 with Mrs. Jayanti Patnaik as the chairperson, for protecting, promoting, and safeguarding the interests and rights of women. The Commission is an autonomous statutory body established by an Act of Parliament called National Commission for Women Act 1990. The Ministry of Women and Child Development of the Government of India is the nodal ministry for the Commission. The objectives of the Commission. The Commission has a wide mandate covering almost all aspects of women's development and empowerment. The objectives of the Commission are to review the constitutional and legal safeguards for women, to recommend remedial legislative measures, to facilitate redressal of grievances, and to advise the government on all policy matters affecting women. Composition of the Commission. The Commission is a multi-member body consisting of a chairperson, 5 members, and a member secretary. The chairperson should be someone who is committed to the cause of women. The 5 members should be from amongst the persons of ability, integrity, and standing who have had experience in law or legislation, trade unionism, management of an industry or organization, committed to increasing the employment potential of women, women's voluntary organization, including women activists, administration, economic development, health, education, or social welfare. However, at least 1 member each should belong to the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes respectively. The member secretary should be an expert in the field of management, organizational structure, or sociological movement, or an officer who is a member of a civil service of the Union or an All India service or holds a civil post under the Union. The chairperson, members, and member secretary are all nominated by the central government, that is, Ministry of Women and Child Development. Their salaries, allowances, and other service conditions are also prescribed by the central government. They hold office for a period of 3 years. They can, however, relinquish their office before the expiry of normal terms by addressing their resignation to the central government. Further, they can be removed from the office by the central government on certain grounds. Functions of the Commission. The Commission is provided with a 14-point mandate. In other words, the Commission performs the following 14 important functions: to investigate and examine all matters relating to the safeguards provided for women under the Constitution and other laws, to present to the central government annually and at such other times as it may deem fit reports upon the working of those safeguards, to make recommendation for the effective implementation of those safeguards for improving the conditions of women by the Union or any state, to review the existing provisions of the Constitution and other laws affecting women and recommend amendments to meet any inadequacy in such laws, to take up the cases of violation of the provisions of the Constitution and other laws relating to women with appropriate authorities, to look into complaints and take suo motu notice of matters relating to deprivation of women's rights, non-implementation of laws enacted to provide protection to women, and also to achieve the objective of equality and development, and non-compliance of policy decisions or instructions aimed at mitigating hardship and ensuring welfare and providing relief to women, to call for special studies or investigation into specific problems or situations arising out of discrimination and atrocities against, and to identify the constraints so as to recommend strategies for their removal, to undertake promotional and educational research so as to suggest ways of ensuring due representation of women in all spheres, and to identify factors responsible for impeding their advancement, to participate and advise on the planning process of socio-economic development of women, to evaluate the progress of the development of women under the Union and any state, to inspect any jail, remand home, women's institutions or other place of custody where women are kept, to make periodical reports to the government on any matter pertaining to women and in particular various difficulties under which women toil, to look into any other matter referred to it by the central government. Now, the powers of the Commission. The Commission can appoint the committee necessary for dealing with the special issues taken up by it from time to time. It is also empowered to co-opt as member of any such committee the persons from outside the commissions. The co-opted persons can attend meetings of the committee and take part in its proceeding, but without the right to vote. The Commission shall regulate its own procedures and also the procedure of its committees. While investigating any matter or inquiry into any complaint, it has all the powers of a civil court trying a suit, and in particular in respect of the following matters: summoning and enforcing the attendance of any person from any part of India and examining him on oath, requiring the discovery and production of any document, receiving evidence on affidavits, requisitioning any public record from any court or office, issuing summons for the examination of witnesses and documents, and any other matters which may be prescribed by the central government. The central government should consult the Commission on all major policy matters affecting women. Reports of the Commission. The Commission presents an annual report to the central government. It can also submit a report as and when it thinks necessary. The central government places all such reports before its House of Parliament, along with a memorandum explaining the action taken on the recommendations made by the Commissions. The memorandum should also contain the reasons for the non-acceptance of any matter concerning any state government. The Commission forwards a copy of such report to such state government. The state government places it before the state legislature along with a memorandum explaining the action taken on the recommendations of the Commission. The memorandum should also contain the reasons for the non-acceptance of any such recommendations. Working and role of the Commission. The Commission processes the complaints received verbally or in writing. It also takes into account suo motu notice of cases related to women. The complaint received relate to various categories of crimes against women such as domestic violence, harassment, dowry torture, murder, kidnapping, abduction, complaints against NRI, that is non-resident Indians, marriages, desertions, bigamy, rape, police harassment or brutality, cruelty by husbands, deprivation of rights, gender discrimination, sexual harassment at workplaces, and so on. The complaints are acted upon in the following manner. Specific cases of police apathy are sent to the police authorities for investigation and cases are monitored. Family disputes are resolved or compromises struck through counseling. Disaggregated data are made available to various state authorities to facilitate action. In cases related to sexual harassment complaints, the concerned organizations are urged to expedite case and the disposal is monitored. For serious crimes, the Commission constitutes an inquiry committee to provide immediate relief and justice to the victims of violence and atrocities. As the problems of violence against women is multifaceted, the NCW, that is National Commission for Women, has adopted a multi-pronged strategy to tackle the problems. The Commission has initiated generation of legal awareness among women, thus equipping them with the knowledge of their legal rights and with the capacity to use these rights. It assists women in redressal of their grievances through pre-litigation services. To facilitate speedy delivery of justice to women, Parivarik Mahila Lok Adalats are organized in different parts of the country. It organizes promotional activities to mobilize women and get information about their status and recommend paradigm shift in the empowerment of women. Conclusion. So far we have discussed about the establishment of the National Commission for Women in 1992, and we have also discussed about the power functions of the National Commission for Women. In conclusions, we can say that in the domain of protection and promotion of women's rights, establishment of National Commission for Women in 1992 is a landmark development. The Commission is an autonomous statutory body created by the National Commission for Women Act 1990, which is enacted by the Parliament of India. It has the mandates to review the constitutional and legal safeguards for women, recommend remedial legislative measures, facilitate redressal of grievances, and advise the government on all policy matters affecting women. Since its inception, the Commission has been taking up and looking after cases related to protection of women's rights. However, despite its existence and score of legal safeguards, women still continue to suffer various forms of atrocities and harassments. The Commission is receiving complaints relating to domestic violence, harassment, dowry torture, desertion, bigamy, rape, and refusal to register FIR, cruelty by husband, deprivation, gender discrimination, and sexual harassment at workplace are still rampant. Therefore, in order to promote the women's rights adequately and in a proper manner, there is need for strengthening the National Commission for Women. Thank you very much.